My name is Janelle Hazard, and I'm the Executive Director and Curator at Tephra Institute of Contemporary Art. Thank you so much for being here. Well, let's see where everyone is joining us from tonight. So I see Lizzie in Falls Church, Virginia, Judith in Charlottesville, Virginia. Judith has an exhibition at our satellite gallery. If you haven't checked it out, please do. Reston, Virginia, and Boston representing. Sarah Tangy from DC. Sarah's asking where the music is from. Our staff member, Sarah, if you can repost that in the chat, we'll share that in just 1 minute. Arlington, Virginia, wonderful. And I see we have some board members here tonight as well. Dan Grove, Ann Barbieri, Robert Gowdy, Janet Rems, Leslie. Fantastic. Thank you all so much for joining us. So the program tonight is the opening reception artist talk for the exhibition Time Sensitive, featuring pioneering Myanmar Artist Collective 3 AM. This program is sponsored by Reston Community Center, and I see Sherry is here with us. Hi, Sherry, and thank you. Thank you also to the sponsors of Tephra ICA, as well as Arts Fairfax, Virginia Commission for the Arts, and the National Endowment for the Arts. We also want to acknowledge the original stewards of the areas known today as Reston and Northern Virginia and the surrounding areas in the Washington, D.C. region, which include the Piscataway peoples and the Manahoac peoples, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. We are so pleased to present Time Sensitive, an exhibition of works by Myanmar Artist Collective 3 AM, guest curated by Adriel Luis. Since 2016, members Ma'e, Kolat, and Yadanar Win have collaborated on works that dissolve the lines between art and activism, performance, and media. 3 AM's work responds to social conditions that are pressing in Myanmar, but that resonate throughout the world. The repression of social critique, the complexities of queer lives, and the effects of globalization, to name a few. Ever since Myanmar's military coup in February this year, internet shutdowns, public uprising, and police violence against demonstrators and artists, the nation's turmoils have been placed back in the global spotlight. Tephra ICA is pleased to show 3 AM's work in the United States for the very first time in support of the collective's efforts to share Myanmar's lived experiences, critical perspectives, and the radical imaginations with the rest of the world. And so we're honored to host this work at the gallery. Without further ado, I would like to introduce the guest curator, Adriel Luis, who is here with us tonight. Adriel is a community organizer, artist, and curator who believes in collective imagination as a pathway towards liberation. His work is focused on bridging artistic integrity and social vigilance. He is part of the ILL Literacy Arts Collective, which creates music and media to strengthen Black and Asian American coalitions. He's creative director of Bombshell Tome, which works with artists to highlight marginalized communities affected by nuclear issues. And he collaborates with dozens of artists and organizations through his curate and design engine, Phenomenon. Adriel is curator of digital and emerging practice at the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center, where he advocates for equitable practices in museums and institutions. Adriel has been a speaker at the Tate Modern, Yale University, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and the China Academy of Fine Arts. He has a degree in human sciences from UC Davis and community and regional development and a minor in Asian American studies. Please help me in welcoming Adriel.
Hello, hi everybody. Hi, how are you? I am tuning in today from Sangna, Tavangar, Venice, California, on the far west side of Los Angeles. So I just want to take a moment to once again recognize the original stewards of the Northern Virginia, DC area, and also out here in Los Angeles, the Tongva people, the Chumash, Quiche, and Gabrielino peoples. This conversation, this exhibition is about, it's about Myanmar, but at the same time, the reason why we felt that this was a great exhibition to bring to Reston is because right now there are so many things happening in our country, in the United States, as well as the rest of the world. And so my hope is that with this exhibition and by learning more about these artists, we find ways to show how our experiences, our visions of the future are all connected in one way or another. And so in particular, when we open with these land acknowledgements, it's not only to recognize the deep history, but also genocide, displacement, power struggles, so many things that are a part of this exhibition that are also deeply embedded into American history. And so with that all in mind, I'm really grateful for you all tuning in. I know it's been many, many, many months of Zooms. And so I never take for granted when somebody makes the decision to stack yet another hour of Zoom time onto their day, especially into the evening. I was super excited to come back to Virginia. I called DC home for 7 years up until right before the pandemic. And it's kind of crazy to think that it'll almost be 2 years since I'll have been anywhere outside of California. So moments like this just help me feel more deeply connected. So thank you everybody at Tephra for having me. I also see in the audience Judith Pratt, who was a part of an exhibition that I curated with Hillier in DC eons ago, Natalie Johnson and Sam, who will also make some guest appearances in the conversation today, folks that I spent some time with in Myanmar. So with that said, how we'll go about the course of the rest of this hour. I'll talk a little bit about my curatorial practice, what led me to curating a show like 3 a.m. Time Sensitive. And then I'll air a conversation that I had with Yadanar Win, one of the members of 3 a.m. Just a couple of days ago. I'm wearing the same shirt, so it can feel like it was live. But Yadanar is currently out in Germany, and the other two artists are in Myanmar. And so because of time zone differences, technology, internet outages, civil war, there's a lot of reasons why they were unable to make it live, but they're all very excited about this especially this being the showing of the first time that they're showing in the United States. So thank y'all for being part of this moment. So with that said, I'll go ahead and share my screen. Just a second. And pop this into presentation mode, I think. I always, okay, there we go. Yay. Y'all good? See everything all right? Okay, cool. Okay, so here's Sam, homie who's tuned in to Zoom, as well as the artists of 3 a.m. To the very left, you see Kolat, and then Yadanar, and then also on my side of the table with my scruffy beard. I decided to do my pandemic beard before the pandemic instead of after. And then my A over there next to Sam's cozy, warm teddy bear smile. And a bunch of really delicious things with spices that I haven't had in my mouth or belly in a very long time. I miss traveling so much. This was my one and only trip so far to Myanmar. We were in Yangon. This is December 2018. And I found myself in Myanmar thanks to Sam Gordon, really, really good friend of mine in DC, who also works with the State Department, part of this really incredible program called Tech Camp. Tech Camp is something that I became involved with a couple of years ago, where we go to different countries and provide training, hands-on or philosophical training around technology and technology's intersection with activism. And so out in Myanmar, I was doing some workshops around media literacy, which we'll get into in a bit about why that's so important somewhere. I mean, it's important everywhere, but especially somewhere like in Myanmar. And when I travel, my favorite part of traveling is meeting folks who are not only local, but who are really deeply invested in the space where they call home. And so I was fortunate enough from past trips out to Southeast Asia and also friends who have been out to Myanmar to be introduced to Ma'e, who again is on the right side. And so this is like maybe like 15, 20 minutes into us meeting for the first time. Ma'e brought Yadanar and Kolat, and we feasted. We went grocery shopping. I like filled my bag with a bunch of dragon fruit, and then later on that week, I got to sit with them, and they brought out a laptop and just showed me some of their work, and I was floored by it. And from that moment, the wheel started turning in terms of just thinking about like, what does it mean to honor this time that we spent together? What does it mean to honor the fact that I'm somewhere like Myanmar, somewhere that is so abstract to so many people in the United States and in the West? A little bit about my curatorial practice and where I come from. So my family is originally from Toisan in southern China. They went to Hong Kong as refugees where my dad was born. My grandfather and great-grandfather snuck into Mexico. Thus, my last name is Luis instead of Lui. Sneaky, sneaky. And then they rendezvoused with the rest of the family in California, where my dad and my mom met. And so I was born and raised in the California Bay Area on Ohlone land. And the Bay Area is somewhere where art and activism always come hand in hand. And so I always understood them as intertwined. And that's the lens that I came into the world with as an artist. In college and after college, I toured full-time as a performance artist, doing work around race and solidarity across different communities of color. And then right before I picked up my position as a curator at the Smithsonian in 2013, I spent 6 months in Beijing. And I was mainly following my partner who was out there to do some research. But at the time, I was also becoming really interested in visual art. I had always been sort of more of a music and performance art person, but I was starting to get really interested in visual art, and especially with the internet, giving me access to different parts of the world, I became really interested in Chinese contemporary art. Somewhere where, as an American, I had always just understood China as this place of repression of speech and expression. So to me, I didn't understand, I couldn't wrap my head around what it meant for there to be radical, imaginative, art, right? And so going out to Beijing really expanded my understanding of what expression is and can be, and also ways that censorship sort of exists all throughout the world in its various different ways. Being in Beijing, I definitely saw how there's a lot of ways that freedom of expression exists in ways I've taken for granted in the US. And then at the same time, I also saw how limitations of what you can say or do in somewhere like China push artists to express themselves in ways that maybe in the US, we don't necessarily feel as challenged to. This is an image in 2014 that I took when I went out to Hong Kong during the umbrella movement, one of the early protests in Hong Kong resisting the shift in government away from democracy. And I sort of, without much intention, ended up finding myself in a lot of places where, while I was traveling, unbeknownst to me, there were either uprisings happening or observations of uprisings happening. One of my first international trips that I took as a curator was to Istanbul, and it ended up being the 1-year anniversary of the Gezi Park protests. And so, similar to in Hong Kong, they were just like street demonstrations mixed with art and installations. And again, growing up in the Bay Area in a very grassroots scene, these really spoke to me in ways that I felt like I wasn't really finding in museums and galleries. And so I would say that if I could kind of contain what I do as a curator in a nutshell, in the bio that Janelle read, when I'm talking about vigilance in grassroots art when I'm talking about bridging social vigilance and art practice. I think a lot of times people think about art activism and they think about it as like janky or like junior varsity or not taken as seriously from an aesthetic perspective. And what I'm really interested in as a curator is demonstrating how art and activism are intertwined in ways that don't have to compromise the artness of the art or the activism of the activism. And when it's at its very best, they really sharpen each other. Here's just right before the pandemic in 2019. I was out in Aotearoa, Auckland, New Zealand, and one of my trips out there, I was curating a show out there that we ended up showing at the end of 2019, but one of my earlier trips out there, it ended up being at the same time as the Christchurch shooting. And so, again, I just saw this wave of participatory democratic art being made. And so being somewhere like Myanmar was a really interesting experience for me because at the time when I was going out there, I had already been hearing about the Rohingya genocide. So Myanmar, there's a number of different ethnicities within Myanmar, and part of what sets the climate out there is just a history of colonialism from the British Empire, and then power struggles between elected government officials, colonial powers, and military government. And so far as long as I could have remembered, Myanmar had been under military rule. It had been under isolation. Very little access to the internet or news or information that's not state sanctioned. And a lot of that changed right around the time that I became a curator in 2013. And so I had been aware of things happening in Myanmar, but never really had a visceral understanding. I think when I go somewhere that I've never been to for the first time, one of the things I really appreciate about that is I just see so many of my assumptions about places outside of the US just become dismantled. The world opens up to me in ways I had never thought. And I think in particular places that people often think of as repressive societies when it comes to art and artists, places like Myanmar, like China, like Singapore, there's a strain of dissident or socially engaged art that I think only is able to happen when it's sprouting through the cracks. And to me, that work is really interesting. But as a curator, I'm also very mindful about just kind of going places and finding things interesting and not contributing to it. And so going out to Myanmar, even though I had the ability to share this workshop, I was still thinking about what does it mean to really honor this time that I was out there for. During that trip to Myanmar, I did a workshop around media literacy, and it was really interesting because I like set up all these PowerPoint slides and everything around truth and trust. And when I got out there, my translator told me that, like, well, actually, the word that you found on Google Translate is not actually the best terminology. It ends up that the word for truth and trust out in Myanmar can oftentimes become sort of blended in with correctness. And so when you're in a society where what is truth is what is correct, and what is correct is what is true, and so much of that is based on who has the power to say what is true and correct, you have some really interesting and compelling and also difficult conversations that arise from that. So shout out to Natalie Johnson and Myanmar, which is one of the dopest spots that I had the pleasure of going to while in Yangon. Natalie and Myanmar have been really in the front lines of not only propelling the contemporary art scene in Myanmar and offering resources and platform and information for the artists, but also when the military coup happened in February, they became a primary source for me in terms of just staying posted with what was going on, what artists and activists were doing, and also a sounding board for me to really think through what it would mean to meaningfully contribute. So with that said, I wanted to, like I have some images of work that that 3 a.m. had been presenting throughout the coup period. And this is stuff that we can kind of share later, but this is actually not work that's in the exhibition. What I wanted to do is actually offer some space to just like listen to a conversation that I had with Yadanar, who is pictured over here. This is during the coup period. I believe it's like March, April time. And part of these uprisings, as important as the protest signs and the marches and things like that, were these really complex demonstrations. So 3 a.m. does work on the streets and also in museums and galleries. So that's just like a little bit of context. And while I'm sharing the video, feel free to pop any questions in the chat or anything, and we'll get to that. I'll play about 15 to 20 minutes of this conversation. And I guess also, if you have the live transcript on the bottom of your Zoom, I actually encourage you to turn it off at this point, because I spent a lot of time yesterday going through and making sure that all the terminology and stuff was as accurate as it could be. It might be a little bit sloppy though, just because I was trying to fit in all the closed captioning editing between our conversation over the weekend and today. So yeah, I'll go ahead and share this in just a second. Thanks y'all for bearing with me. So I'll just like not talk for like 10 seconds so folks can like breathe and rest their eyes and stuff. I know I like to do that during Zoom events. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so pleased and honored and excited to be in conversation with Yadanar Win, one of the members of 3 a.m. As we know, 3 a.m. is the featured artist for Time Sensitive, an exhibition at the Tephra Institute of Contemporary Art. So welcome, Yadanar. How are you doing?
Hello, Adrian, and hello, everyone. I am Yadanar Win, and I'm an artist from 3 a.m., one of the members, and also I'm from Myanmar, and I am very honored to be participate in our work in time-sensitive exhibition. And thank you very much, Adrian, and thank you very much, Tempera Contemporary Art.
Yeah. So, and can you let folks know what's your situation right now? Where are you, and what's this past year been like for you?
I am currently now in south of Germany in a city named Rothenburg. It's around Baden-Württemberg area as a resident artist in the theater performance program, and I was arrived here in Germany in 20th of April. So it's very recently. And I was in Myanmar when there was a coup had happened on the 1st of February. And yes, actually, I was in the Europe for another art residency before coup had happened. But because of COVID, I was stuck in Europe. And after that, I go back to Myanmar. And also one of the reasons to work with 3 a.m. To create new work as we plan. And then so there was a coup in Myanmar on 1st of February. Yes, about the coup. So it was a very, very like a nightmare for us. I remember what had happened in the 1st of February, all internet were blackout, and our elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi and her NLD member were arrested. Now we don't know where she was detained. Then around 3 days later, whole people in Myanmar are in the street protesting to reject the military coup. And it was day by day, month by month, it's getting worse and worse situation. Now it has been 8 months, so nearly 9 months, 8 months already, nearly 8 months already, February. So 7 months. So because of now it's end of 8 months, and over 1,026 people were killed shooting by military, and 7,627 people were arrested, and 6,005 people are stay in the prison, and then 1,984 people are in warrant list. And most of my friends, including artists, are now in the PDF, People Defense Force camp in the forest because of the afraid of getting caught by military because of their protests and their movement on reject on military. And all the situation in Myanmar, the economy, healthcare, education, everything is getting slower and slower and getting worse and worse. And we all are around the world and also inside the country and outside the country, we still are fighting and against military till today.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, I remember, well, we met a few years ago when I had a chance to visit Yangon. And of course, this was before the military coup, but I was still learning a lot about the history of civil war and the power struggles that have been happening for decades. And so when I saw the posts start showing up on Facebook and Instagram, you know, it was a really, you know, I mean, it continues to be a really dire situation, but I remember just in February how much, you know, how much noise there was being made from Myanmar, especially activists and artists. And so I wonder, you know, like you and Kolat and Mae have been doing, you know, really important and urgent work for a long time, even before the coup. What is the role of artists in the movement right now?
Yes, we started our work as 3M 2016 is after NLD, this elected government for democracy. They win the election, but still at that time the country is, we can say, have democracy and have a dictator, because dictator has absolutely power even though they name it democracy, because they got the seat in the parliament and they have a bigger hand on the economy. And also Myanmar is a very strong culture and traditional background and very religious country. So, and we will have this dictatorship since our parents died around like 1962. So it was all we faced with how we grew up with this dictator reign, with this limited on freedom of censorship and human rights. So our work has always been about our society and how we oppress as a human being, and the military win and discriminated as a woman artist or as a homosexual artist. So we three want to portray about it, and we play with the material. At the same time, we are looking for the medium which can express our emotion through art, looking for aesthetic, innovative, and artistic way of delivery message of our society to the world. And for your question, in this during this period, especially after February first coup, and a lot of artists, painters, cartoonists, poets, performers, film and musicians, they express their strong way against dictatorship and about the coup in Myanmar, and through the social media, through internet, and to the world. And because of that, some of them were arrested, some of them got even killed, and still we are fighting with what we have. And then we are speaking to the world about what is happening in our country. So yeah, with art, the artist's role is for the social justice with the weapon of art, and we are fighting. So, and I thought that our voices need to be heard, as you know, now is being over 7 months, and the war is less and less pay attention of what is happening now in Myanmar. So it is that we are not okay and well, that we are still struggling, and then a situation getting worse and worse. So, and the military, they keep on killing the young people and they keep on arresting. So we would like to ask, and especially with this the chance to speak out, and now we have chance to tell you the message like this. So, and then we would like to tell everyone to be with us in this fight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Yadanar. I mean, yeah, like you said, the attention span sometimes for world events can be very short, and so sometimes when you stop seeing something in the news, people assume that it's not as serious anymore, or that maybe it's over, but obviously that's not true. You know, like of course in 2020 in the US there was a lot of big protests, a lot of demonstrations around police violence against Black folks out here, the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. But now that it, you know, there's less news around the protests, that doesn't mean that the violence has ended, right? And I think, you know, ever since February, you know, there's been a lot of big news around Palestine, and more recently around Afghanistan. But of course, all these things are happening at the same time, and in some ways they're connected, right? Around power and resources. So yeah. So I think it is important that people know that what's happening in Myanmar that began in February, it's still happening. And I mean, when you know, for me in the US, I think what was really helpful in staying informed was seeing the videos that people were posting online. And I think one of the things that was really powerful to me was that you have a lot of protests and demonstrations that are woven in with art and performance. And I remember even seeing videos of you and the other members of 3 a.m. on the streets demonstrating. Can you describe to people sort of what that environment was like? Like how were people in the community responding to the art during the protests?
Yes. So in this after like near 3 days after the coup had happened, and then people are starting to go out, and then our like contemporary another group of artists, we are like discussing about what is the role of art in this matter. So this first movement could be said as artists drawing on the street roadside to sell their artwork to support a civil disobedience movement. Civil disobedience movement is in Myanmar is a very important. Still currently, people are still practicing now. It is some of the government staff don't go to work and work for military, so new military wing, so they stop working. So because of they stop working, they have no money for, and so firstly the artists in the artists in this AMCA, Association of Myanmar Contemporary Art, is a newly formed a group of artists, painter, performers, and contemporary artists, visual artists. They draw, they paint, and they sell it, and they make donation to the people who decided to be involved in the civil disobedience movement. So this is the first artist movement that we practice, and in there are also performance artists involved, and also there are also filmmaker and also photographer. So they are also protest at the same time. Also they are doing their role of selling their artwork to really support this CDM people, and also people who will be affected in war displaced area, because as you know, there are also the civil war in other area Myanmar. In because of this coup, it getting intense, and also they are more against the military. So artists are still, we are now not on the street anymore, but online. We selling our artwork, and we try to make exhibition, and we donate as much as we can with the organization and as a individual group. And also we as a 3 a.m. In especially in Minigong area at the early days of February, before the massive shooting started. So this Minigong bridge is the main gathering point for people to protest. People sing there, reading poetry, and they do art installation, and they show any way that they can to reject the coup and to against the military. So we were doing at this time that performance art, all of us in a for 2 or 3 days consequently, and we stop when there is a massive shooting. At other day there is around uh, around 24 or 25 people they killed in only alone in Yangon. They shoot in the head. So at that time we stopped going on the street, but we still doing underground movement in the graffiti, and also we as a 3 a.m. We also walking try we discuss each other and how we can create artwork in this period, and it's the situation or the security for everyone inside Yangon is getting tighter and tighter, because after the February, they check everyone who go out. They stop the car, and the soldier and police are on the street with the gun, and they guarding. And if even we go out and meet for a meeting, they stop the car and they check if you are involved in this political like or artwork or like political message or something like that. They check it if you involve, or if you are in the protest, you are in the jail. So yeah, and at the same time, there in the social media, I've never saw there's so many creativity, created artwork, which is representing about this freedom of human right, the freedom and human right, and against the dictatorship. And also a lot of cartoon is on all over social media, and also the musician, they create sounds about this, and also the filmmaker, they are taking any like creating work with what they can, and they're documenting, and also very brave photographer, and they post on the for social media and for the world to see what is really happening inside Myanmar.
Yeah. It's there's so much art coming out, and it's really beautiful. I think especially because even trying to post online has been a struggle, right? Like sometimes there's been internet shutdowns. Things like that. So
yeah, it's a very difficult, and also it's getting internet insecure. They are also shut down, and also there is when the military, when they give warrant, arrest list, they use the profile picture of Facebook. So it's very like, so people has to lock their profile. So because they even checking with the profile and also the maybe the messenger are not safe, people say. And now because of it's been over 7 months, and then now people are try to protest and try to against the military in other ways. So it's the security are more like more tight. And yeah, I heard, I just read the news this morning, and then now they, like before was they only check the like own car, or like if people driving, if they think this is okay, not right, then they stop. But now they check everyone, they check the bus, they check the motorbike, like everyone. And also they check people houses at night without any warrant.
Wow.
So it's getting worse, and it's also getting worse human rights violation.
All right, thanks, y'all. Thanks for tuning in. Janelle, how are we feeling with timing and everything right now?
Well, I think we're all feeling impacted by, the conversation today, the screening. I'd like to take a moment to visit the questions that are in the chat for now, and we can go from there. Let's take a look. So Judith Pratt, hi Judith. She asked, in one of the photos of the city streets in Myanmar that Adriel showed, many satellite dishes were visible on the buildings. How does that satellite access help or harm the society in Myanmar during this time? How does the access help or hinder artists? Are you able to answer that, Adriel?
So you're talking about the image that I had that I just kind of took on the street in Myanmar. Let me go back and take a look at that real quick.
Judith is nodding her head yes.
Okay. I do not know the answer to that question, honestly. I hadn't even really peeped all the satellites. I mean, this isn't exactly answering your question, but to give you a sense of what the history of technology and access is in Myanmar. So for us, in the US, it's like we got cell phones, and then we got dial-up internet, and then we got high-speed internet, and then social media and mobile. And so we saw all of that kind of in stages, whereas in Myanmar, because of the isolation, largely people didn't have access to any of that technology. And then when the democratic government came in, at the beginning of the 2010s, that's when everybody kind of got that in. And so for example, when it comes to free media or media that's not state sanctioned, a lot of people have been getting it on Facebook. And so for us, like when we're talking about kind of like news and the difference between, like looking at something that's from like Associated Press versus something that's just being posted by like your uncle from some like random link, like we've had decades of training for that kind of media literacy, whereas that hasn't necessarily been the case, at least not in the same way in Myanmar. Again, that's not answering your question about what those satellites are, but perhaps when Natalie Johnson comes in and does a talk, she can address some of those things. I also got a little bit distracted because I had not been looking at the chat, and I saw the notes about those rectangular squares, and I'm so sorry. That was probably actually y'all on my sidebar over that video, so I apologize for that. I hope it wasn't too much of a distraction.
It's okay. The point of the screening was to encourage you all to actually come to the gallery, because like most artwork, it's not the same on screen as it is in the actual gallery experience. So we hope that gave you a peek into what to expect. And once you're in the actual exhibition space, the overlapping of sounds of the video are contributing to the whole experience. And sort of what Adriel and our team were discussing was trying to replicate some of that live performance environment that may happen in Myanmar of the sounds of the city streets. So please do make an appointment to visit the gallery if you haven't already. The next question is from Janet Rems, who's our board member. Hi, Janet. Do you feel the US is moving in the direction of Myanmar? Less freedom of expression, more repression of minorities, more threats to your expectations as an American artist?
You know, I feel like that's not necessarily a yes or no question in that, you know, so I'll give you an example. Being a very, you know, like growing up in the US, you know, like and then also when I went to Myanmar in 2018, it was like, you know, peak headlines around the Rohingya genocide. And so for those who are less familiar, Myanmar is comprised of a lot of different minorities that sort of in the West, we just sort of generalize as Myanmar or Burmese. But this is really because of land and borders that were set through the British Empire that following World War II ended up displacing a lot of people. So for example, with my work at the Smithsonian, I'm also working with Karen community, which is an ethnic minority community of Myanmar. And there's a burgeoning populations, there's large populations in like Minneapolis and in Nebraska, but I'm working with a community out in Akron, Ohio. And this is just like one of many different groups. The Rohingya are people who have also been displaced a bit at the border. And so especially in 2018, there was a lot of news coming out about the genocide happening out there. So when I went out there, I was like, well, we're going to be doing something around technology and activism. You know, I was expecting for it to be at the height of conversation in these workshops, and it ended up not being discussed really at all. And then so again, you know, from my very American perspective, you know, like ideas of apathy start coming out and things like that in my mind. And it wasn't until later on in the evening when I was meeting with some artists, some folks who have traveled around a bit and sort of like understand why someone from like a very Western perspective would come in with all these expectations. You know, somebody that I was talking to was just like, you know, it's not that we're just wanting to stand on the sidelines, but you know, I can only begin to tell you about how delicate the situation is when we've experienced civil war in our own lifetimes. You know, like it's not like in the US where you can talk about civil war and then like have reenactments, right? It's not looked at abstractly. The decisions that we make, the things that we speak out about directly affect whether or not our country ends up in a heightened civil war once again, you know? And we see that when I was out there in 2018. I mean, we were at like kind of, you know, hipster cocktail bars, you know, like there was a lot of stuff where I was just like, okay, you know, like this doesn't seem quite different from American society. And then at the same time, you know, earlier this year, we saw so many things happen. And so I do feel like there are a lot of connections among the different things that are happening throughout the US. But at the same time, I don't think that it's necessarily about drawing parallels between like, oh, what's happening right now in Myanmar is similar to like what happened at like the Capitol in January in DC. You know, when we think about artists and minority groups in the US, I think I don't know. I mean, this is like a conversation I could talk forever about, but particularly when I think about like expression and sort of where artists are steered, I feel like in the US, it's less about censorship and like you can't say that, and it's more about creating incentives that are so difficult and nearly impossible to resist if you want to live as an artist. So what does it mean to be an artist in the United States and be able to make a living if you do not necessarily commercialize your art? What does it mean to actually be able to dedicate your life to social movements as an artist, but still be able to pay your rent and buy your groceries? I think that oftentimes when I find socially engaged artists sort of step back, it's not because the White House is telling them they can't say that. It's because they need to get that grant or they need to sell that work. And then that ends up pivoting their expression. We may or may not call it censorship, but it definitely does affect sort of what an artist may intend to do versus what the reality of the situation requires them to do.
Thank you, Adriel. Sarah Tanguy, thanks for being here, Sarah. Sarah says, I think it's really important, especially now, to keep these issues alive and for artists to play a major role in this endeavor. I think later on, Sarah says, this is really wonderfully sensitive, natural, and insightful conversation. Thanks to all involved. Then we have Natalie Johnson says, incredible. And Greenwood says, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about the sound in this work and maybe explain why the loud sounds are important, if they are. She apologizes for not being able to have her camera on, which is totally okay.
Yeah. No worries. I mean, so this work is difficult to watch. When I first received it, I actually had some questions about whether or not it would work for the exhibition. And, Janelle knows every time we were talking about the exhibition, I was like, is someone going to be working at the gallery and just like having to hear, like these alarms go off all the time? But to give you some context, and Yadanar talks about it a bit more in length in this chat. But so Mae tells this story. One of the members of 3 a.m. Mae tells a story about two soldiers who are from two different groups working at the border, and they're sharing a meal together during lunchtime. They're vibing, they're chilling, but then at some point they have to go back to work. And then when they go back to work, they're fighting against each other. It's kind of like, I don't know, like there's old Looney Tunes cartoons like that, where it's like the Roadrunner and Coyote are like chasing each other. And then at some point they like clock out and then they're just like, goodbye, have a nice day, say hi to the wife, right? Like that's a Looney Tunes cartoon. But at the same time, this video really speaks to the reality of that situation. I mean, even the American Civil War, there were families torn apart, friendships torn apart. And I think it might be difficult for us to wrap our heads around. That's why I think in the US, we say we're on the brink of civil war, and we're kind of not when you've actually, like if you've witnessed civil war, like with this video, when the music is playing and you're seeing the spread of food, to me, it's conveying the beauty and the diversity and the breadth of culture in Myanmar. And then at the same time, so much of that richness and so much of that beauty has been constantly disturbed and disrupted by the outbreak of war. And it could kind of like happen like at any time. Like when I was out there in 2018, I could definitely see how there's a history of civil war, but there's no way I could have, I mean, in the short time that I was there, could have predicted that 2 years later, things were going to be the way that they are now. So this piece, as well as another piece with Avarice, were actually worked on during the coup. So they created it in the studio, and actually the post-production was done by Yadanar while out in Germany. The other two artists, Colette and Mae, actually went out to the forest. And so aside from like every few weeks getting like a text from them on Facebook Messenger, just letting us know that they were safe, like they were off the grid. So that direness, I think, is really in what they're doing in that performance piece. So yeah, just like a little bit of explanation of that sound. The music is when there's not an outbreak of war. And then I think the constant outbreak of war is something where folks just kind of have to like always be on guard and like each time they're seeing their society and their culture being damaged more and more. And then particularly at the end where, it's just become so devastated that all they can really do is work together to try to repair things.
Thank you. And I'll just mention that when you come to visit the gallery, Adriel has written some wonderful, thorough artwork label text that go beside each work that explain more of what he just began to talk about with this video and the other two time-based media works in the show. Natalie Johnson did respond that satellites are for cable television, not internet or connectivity per se. TV channels are mainly owned by the military. And Dan Grove commented, he's one of our board members, that the music in the film seems to be determined, or seems to determine the human behavior, which I think seems to be true. Adriel, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up for the evening. But we will make the video with the Yadanar that we heard earlier, which delved deeper into all of the happenings in Myanmar right now. We'll make that available online. We'll include it in our thank you email that we send to all the attendees of each program afterwards. So you can expect that tomorrow. But thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Adriel, this has been a really insightful evening. Thank you for shepherding this very important work, for sharing insight into what's going on in Myanmar, making connections that we each can relate to in some way. It's wonderful to hear from Yadanar, though the situation is really grim right now. And again, these works are much different in person, and we hope that you will visit the gallery to see them. If not, the online viewing room is available as well if you're not comfortable coming to the exhibition right now. The online viewing room also goes deeper into some of the intention behind the work and why Adriel thought that it was very important to share with our region. I wanted to close on this quote that Adriel provided that for me, I always find myself coming back to when it comes to spending time in the space with the work. And it goes, the imagery, gestures, and sounds and time sensitive are sometimes disarming, unnerving, and even jarring. They are also vivid, intimate, and fiercely human. And that's the quote. But for me, I think that, I don't know, it just makes you realize that you're not just watching a production. These are actually feelings and events and emotions and actions that are happening and in the lives of 3 AM, this pioneering artist collective. So again, Adriel, thank you for being here. Thank you for the beautiful dialogue, for introducing us to this work, and even perhaps some to Myanmar. Again, thank you everyone for joining us. Time Sensitive is on view until January 9th, and the online viewing room can be found on our website at tephra.ica.org. Please stay connected with us on social media and sign up for our newsletter to stay updated on all things Tephra ICA. All right, everyone, good night.